We are a Sitecore user group Coimbatore. Basically, we are a Sitecore enthusiasts based out of a Coimbatore. So our main goal is to making a organizing an event and then like organizing a meetups based on the Sitecore to encourage collaboration with our Sitecore professionals. So this is us, and we have our organizers. One of our organizers, Prabhu Ranganathan, who is a Sitecore architect, who has had more than a decade in a Sitecore experience in industry. And then this is Gautam Iswarmurthy. He is a Sitecore lead. He is also having more than 6 years of experience. And this is me, Vignesh Jyoti Kumar. I'm a senior Sitecore specialist. I'm having more than 6 years in experience in Sitecore industry. So today's our speaker is Anandita Bhattacharya. So we have a topic called Experience Editor Best Practices with Sitecore MVC. And she is a 8-time Sitecore MVP. Also, she is one of the leading Sitecore user group Bangalore organizer. Also, she's a I mean, in the Sitecore community, she is spending more time for us. So nothing more wait. I'm handing over to Anandita. Thank you, Anandita, for joining us.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Please let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah.
Okay. So thanks, SUG Coimbatore, and thank you to all the organizers for helping set up this session. I'm sorry if you hear puja bells in the background. It's that time of the year. So yeah, my husband just started all that. Anyways, so okay, let's talk about Sitecore MVC Experience Editor best practices. So let me introduce myself. I think already they've done a good job introducing me, but just to add on to that, I have about overall 17 years of experience doing .NET development and a little over 10 years working with Sitecore. So seen a lot of ups and downs with Sitecore. So I think that counts for something. And a lot of people in the industry obviously can say that, but yeah, it's great to see the phases that Sitecore has gone through. The topic that I have picked today is regarding Sitecore MVC Experience Editor and the best practices for it. It's not really groundbreaking. It's a pretty basic topic, and people who have worked on Sitecore MVC projects ideally should be aware of all of this that I'm going to speak about right now. But I was just surprised by how many people are not aware of some of these things just because maybe it didn't come up in their project. And given that Sitecore has so many new offerings nowadays, this back to basics kind of topic, as they mentioned, the organizers mentioned, it has taken a backseat. So even when I take interviews of people or work with say junior developers or work with developers who have perhaps based most of their work using SXA. So all of these nice to have basic things, somehow I've seen that a lot of people are not aware of these things. So that's why I thought it would be a good session, a good refresher kind of thing. So to go over these concepts. So that being said, let's get started. So as we all know, Experience Editor is the WYSIWYG editor that Sitecore provides for editing your content. So it's a inline editor, and WYSIWYG as in what you get is what you see is what you get, I guess. Yeah. So that editor that Sitecore has, and most of you are probably aware of Horizon also coming up at this time, and so from what I understand of Horizon, it's a good marriage between the content editor and the experience editor modes. but I still believe that a lot of these things are going to be relevant. So, uh, like I mentioned, this is it is something that is very basic, and we all should already know it. But when good effort and time goes into doing this right, I think it is we can reap huge benefits in our project, and it really helps with the content authoring experience. So maybe basic, but it's definitely worth paying attention to things like this. So let's get started based on that. So Sitecore as such does provide a lot of inherent support for being able to edit things in Experience Editor mode. So it's a matter of knowing what the things that Sitecore provides and what we can do to leverage all of this. So basic fields like your text fields and images and all of that, it's usually pretty straightforward to give Experience Editor support. So some scenarios to mention here, which you might want to, you might have to pay some extra attention to. Those are what I've listed out here. So the first one is, fields that are not rendered on the page, things like page metadata. So these are the things that you might have to do something additional, being a developer, to expose them to be edited in content editor mode. So these are the scenarios that I've listed out. So as I mentioned, page metadata is not rendered on the page as such to view, right? This is more of a towards search engine optimization engines or tools. So how would you expose that in the content in the experience editor mode? Then the next scenario is reference fields. This is the more common one. I guess we have reference fields like drop links, multi-links, multi-lists, tree lists, and stuff like that. So these things are not out of the box experience editor friendly. So you need to do something additional as a developer to make sure that they are editable. Then, fields like dates, checkboxes, files. So again, the same scenario where you don't exactly render these as is, you use them to manipulate your content. And dates are usually formatted. So what can you do to make sure that these are also editable? A lot of the times, the images are rendered, need to be rendered as a background image based on the design that you have. So even in that case, since you're adding it as a background on a particular HTML tag, so that removes the editability. So that is also something that you might have to handle from your end, and you have to choose how to handle that. The other scenario here is JavaScript enhanced components. So by this, I mean things like your carousels and galleries and sliders and things like that. Anything that you're probably using JavaScript to transform. So in that scenario, it's not that straightforward to actually get the editability. And sometimes you have that the JavaScript that is transforming your markup that interferes with the experience editor JavaScript as well. So in that case, you have to put some additional effort to make sure that it's all editable. So these are some of the scenarios where uh, you will have to put in some additional effort and make sure that everything is tested and everything can still be done from the experience editor mode. So this is an example of a way in which you can handle, say, background images, like I mentioned in this case. So two of the scenarios that I'm going to talk about right now, just as an example, a teaser. So in one of our projects, we had done this where the background image, where this was, I think, a hero or something, or a spotlight field that we had. So the image was set as a background image, and what we had done was in Experience Editor mode, we were rendering an inset of the same background image. So when you loaded the page in Experience Editor, you still had the component loading as per design, but you also had an inset image and that was the one which was editable. So in this way, we were still able to maintain the design, and we didn't just say that, if it is normal mode, then render it correctly. If it is an experience editor mode, render junk. So we didn't do that. Instead of that, we made it look a little bit nicer for the content author. So this is one of the examples of how you can handle certain things in a more graceful way. And other things like carousels and galleries, like I mentioned, you could consider turning off the transformation for Experience Editor. But that being said, you might still want to have some sort of styling in place so that the experience, the content author is not seeing complete junk in the Experience Editor. You do need to have to put an effort into that as well. But usually that's what I have seen in practice for these kind of components. And obviously, the experience editor being a visual editor, you still want to have give the content author the capability of previewing things. And I mentioned preview because I would stress on using preview mode. I have often seen that the preview mode gets ignored, and we stress on the experience editor mode and try to use that as a preview mode. So this is something that I wanted to stress on. It's always important to educate the content author also that the, the preview mode is there for a reason, and use that to preview your content instead of depending and hoping that experience editor is going to help you preview everything as is, because experience editor has a lot going on its own. And the main goal to me in the experience editor mode is to make sure everything is editable. It might not look exactly the way you want it to, but at least I can change everything in that WYSIWYG editor. And I can use the preview mode to actually do the preview without experience editors, JavaScript and CSS interfering. So that is something that I would definitely want to stress on. Now, moving on to the implementation of doing these things. So for simple fields, like I mentioned, there is out-of-the-box support for things like, obviously, yeah, text and IMG tags and stuff like that. So when it comes to using, the out-of-the-box Sitecore methods, so Sitecore HTML helpers, usually they will ensure editability in case of simple fields, especially. If you're using something like Glassmapper, then one tip here is to look into standard output parameter. So I'm sure everyone has looked at it, but just to reiterate, when you're going to output things like dates and copyrights and things like that, so which you might want to transform or or format in a certain way while you output it on the website, but you still want to maintain editability. So using standard output, it lets you specify a different format to show it on the website, as opposed to as opposed to what you're seeing in experience editor mode, and you don't have to write if else logic there. So a good example of this, like I mentioned, is copyright. So usually we have a placeholder for current year. So when you're editing, it will still show you that placeholder and the text with it. But this, if you've given the standard output where you have replaced that placeholder already, with the same line of code, it's actually going to show you the updated content on the website. So this is not always the complete solution, for other things as well, but at least for text fields which you're trying to format, example, formatting the date in a certain way with a, with some sort of date format specifier. So that also is a good example of using this. So in these cases, using standard output is a very good option. Now, sometimes I know that based on business logic, sometimes you cannot avoid rendering raw content, but as a practice, obviously you want to avoid doing that, because as soon as you do that, you lose your experience editor editability. But if for whatever reason you just simply have to show raw content, and by that I mean you're just directly output or going to output content from the field and not use any helpers or anything, then yeah, the workaround there is obviously you have conditional logic for experience editor mode versus normal mode. But then that is additional work that you're doing to maintain experience editor friendliness. Now, when you're trying to maintain the experience editor friendliness, there are basically two things that is happening under the hood. Whatever code you're writing, so when that content is being rendered, you have to tell, or at least the code has to know, that this is the item I'm trying to render, and this is the field from that item that I'm trying to render. And that is the only way that Sitecore is going to know that this is the item and this is the field that it needs to go and update when you are editing content. So there are two uh, good provisions that Sitecore has for being able to add custom experience editor friendliness. And these are the two options that I have mentioned here under reference fields. One is experience editor buttons on renderings, and the other is edit frame. So these are the main topics I think I wanted to cover today, and I'm um, so it's not new in Sitecore. It's been around since forever, but a lot of people have not used this. I think I have at least noticed that myself. So these are the main things that I want to cover here. Um, they're pretty easy to implement, and I would suggest that if you're working on a project, you put in the effort from the very beginning to make sure that everything is editable, because these things pile up very soon. Once you have like 25 components, going back and retrofitting all of them becomes a huge task. So the best practice would obviously be to put in that effort for each component as and when you develop it, and that way you have this support that is developed throughout the project. So let's look at experience editor buttons first. So yeah, I have the way that we do this, and we'll just compare both of them as well quickly once we're done with this. So when you're trying to use experience editor buttons, what you're doing is, so you can see the output here on the right on this screenshot when I'm trying to edit. So in this case, I've used a text field just for simplicity, but you can use any field type that you want. So once you have implemented it, it gives a new button in the Experience Editor toolbar. And when you launch that, it gives you the ability to edit whatever fields you have configured on the left here in the core database. So what you're doing is you are creating custom experience buttons in this particular location in web edit. I think it's under applications. Yeah, it's under applications. So you create a custom button, and you are telling the experience editor the list of fields that you would like to edit. Now note that you're not telling experience editor which item these fields belong to. So I have created the button. I have told it that these are the fields I want to edit. And now I will go and connect the button that is available, or button or buttons, on the rendering itself. So in the rendering, you need to go and select the experience editor button that you created in your core database. So once you do this, when you go into experience editor, it automatically resolves which item you're trying to edit. Now you have to note that. So like I mentioned, for the experience editor to work, the code needs to know which item you're editing and which field you're trying to edit. So the item here is being resolved automatically. How it does that is, this is in the context of the rendering. So it's going to decide in the same way that renderings decide what their source item is. So in case you have a data source, it automatically resolves to that for the component. If you don't have a data source, it's going to automatically resolve to the context item itself. So in the same way that your components decide what their source is. So based on the item that got resolved automatically, it's going to try and map the field or fields So it's a pipe separated list. It's going to map these fields to that item and make them available for editing here. So this is going to be available obviously on a rendering level. So when you select the rendering in Experience Editor mode, you will get the option with these buttons that you have selected. Now, do note here, you don't need a single line of code for this. Right? So everything was done just in Sitecore. Even on a, you don't need, obviously, so you don't need a deployment. You can just add this stuff on the fly in Sitecore. But you are restricted to only the item that Sitecore will resolve for you, either the data source or the context item. So this is one of the ways that it makes it really easy, and it's only in Sitecore that's happening, you know. So I think this is one of the ways to make sure editability is there, and especially if you're trying to just expose it for the data source item. Now the next method is using edit frame. So edit frame, it gives you a little bit more control, because in addition to saying which fields you're trying to edit, you can also tell it that this is the item the field is in. So I'm not restricted to only editing the data source item or the context item. I can actually just specify any item I like and make that editable and attach it to any any piece of markup on the page. So previously I was restricted to only a rendering level editability. Now in this case, I can just create an edit frame for any piece of HTML. I can purposely create like a small div over there and put a image or something, and I can make that as my frame, and I can provide the list of options I would like to render that frame, and I can tell it that, okay, here is the item, this is the item, these are the fields. When someone tries to edit tries to look at edit options for this piece of markup, show these fields. So that is what you can do with edit frame. So you can see how we are doing it here. The configuration in CoreDB is quite similar, as in it's under the same section, but you have edit frame section here. So you create a button for it. Usually we just end up copying the default instead of trying to figure out what are the templates and stuff like that. It's easier to just duplicate the default one and then rename it and add values to it as is applicable to you. So you have the same list of pipe separated fields. So this is pretty similar to what we saw with the custom buttons, but you do need to add this line of code because of the additional thing that you're trying to do, that is pass the identifier of the item as well. Now, since we are doing it like this, okay, and editability wise, like I mentioned, whatever markup you are surrounding the edit frame with, you can select that, and you can get the options that you have configured. You'll get this button that you have configured, and that will provide you editability for this particular item where you have passed the ID, and for the fields that you have configured in the buttons. So as a result of this, on a given rendering, you can have multiple instances of um, bits of markup or bits of the page where you can just select it and get the custom editor buttons and edit any item. It could be a reference item, it could be a settings item, it could be anything. So you can pretty much make anything editable in this case. Yeah. So, but as you can see, you need additional code for it, apart from things that you have added in core DB as well. So I think these are the most important things, but they're extremely underused for whatever reason. I know it's extra effort, but yeah, definitely worth the effort is what I would say. So just to compare, I guess these two, and this is stuff that we spoke about. So these two basic methods, one is providing fields to edit. You need to do that pretty much in the same way for both of these. Item to be edited, in edit frame, you are specifying it explicitly, whereas here it is going to be resolved automatically based on the data source or the context item. Code change, edit frame does need it, experience editor buttons don't. HTML to be selected, edit frame, it can be customized to anything. So Experience Editor, like I mentioned, it's only available for the rendering at the rendering level. Flexibility wise, obviously, Edit Frame gives you all the flexibility that you want and need. While Experience Editor button is a little restrictive, but if it solves your purpose, obviously that is lesser work. So that's about these two. I'm going to just speak about, I think there was one more nice instance I found yesterday. Yeah. So yesterday I was just, preparing for this, and I came across this particular video from Vasily. I'm sure some of you have probably already, heard of him. He's also a multiple time MVP. All right. And he usually has all of these videos and trainings and stuff like that, so which are really helpful. So this was a nice one that I saw. I haven't used it myself, and it's not a new concept. Even the video is like 6 years old or something, and Vasily himself mentioned that he's been seeing this from the beginning of his career, which was long back. So what they've done is for editing metadata, uh, he seems to have created a rendering for it, or it's a marketplace module. So what they've done is at the end of the page, for if it is in editing mode, you add, and this is in the layout. So in the layout, you add some rendering, which is going to expose all of these unrendered fields which you want to make Experience Editor friendly. So there we have a lot of usually page level fields, right? Things like your metadata, your analytic snippets, and things like that. So if you want to even expose all of these things, I think this is a good way of doing it. In your layout, you kind of add this additional rendering which deals with all of this. And in that rendering, you can either choose to just render all of these text fields and make them editable, or you could, just have like some sort of indicator and do it using Experience Editor buttons, or you know um, um, well, not yeah, why not Experience Editor buttons, which would use the context item and make those editable. So it's up to you how you want to expose it and how you want to implement the editability of these fields. But yeah, it just seemed like a good way of doing it to me. Now, one more thing to consider here, the rich text editor. So we know that Sitecore has this rich text editor Telerik component that it uses, and it does have a lot of options. Even that is something that you would want to configure to its optimal configuration, so that it helps the content author to the most. So there are 3 points I just want to mention. There's a lot that you can do with the rich text editor, but there's just 3 things I want to call out for now. One is the HTML editor profiles. So as you can see that when you select a rich text in the source, you can actually provide what kind of these editing options will be available to the content author when they try to edit the edit the content using the rich text editor. So these options that you're seeing here, this is the complete this is like the rich text full, the profile that I have used. This is the complete list of editing options that are available right now. But by default, you're not going to see all of this. You're just going to see like part of the first line. That is if you don't mention anything here. So the default one will just show you very limited options. So this is something that you can configure either on field level, or you can even turn it on your website level. So based on the requirements that you have and the business need for it, you can choose to turn it on at whatever level you need. But it's a good thing to know. A lot of people I've seen are not aware of this either, just because maybe it's not used as much. I'm not sure. But yeah, depends project to project, that varies. So that was one of the things you'd want to keep an eye on. Apart from that, these 2 things I would like to call out, which I've actually used in my projects in the past, and they've been pretty helpful. As a part of this full profile, you get these 2 options. One is apply CSS class, and this is something that as developers we can configure. So what it does is it gives the ability of configuring some classes and styling them and making them available as a drop down. So as a content author, I can select any part of my content and wrap that around and stick this class onto that content. And I found this particularly useful when you have things like you know the website styled buttons. If the content author is adding some content and they want to style some given links in the in the markup based on the website design, so they don't it's not on them to actually sit and style it to match the general style guide of the website, and they don't have to remember the class name for it. So you can just select a particular anchor tag and then apply the class to it. So that is one of the things that you might want to configure to give the flexibility to content authors. And another thing is this icon here, which is actually a snippet icon. So I found this also very useful, where you can configure certain HTML snippets. So based on your business need, whatever it is, if you have a recurring snippet of some sort, so you can configure that. And whenever the content author wants to insert that snippet into the markup, they can just choose from this and get it inserted into rich text. So this would be like a repeating snippet, which is more relevant to your business as such. So as a developer, these are some things that you can do based on your business need to make your content author's life easier in the rich text editor editing. So some points regarding what you can do additionally, apart from the specific stuff that we mentioned. This is more, I guess, generic. So I always say that, as Sitecore developers, the content author is our primary client. It's not the end user. The end user is the primary client probably for designers. By the time all of that comes to us developers, we are pretty much just catering to what the UX designers have, or UX designers and front end developers and all that, what they have given to us. By the time it comes to us, we're not deciding any of that anymore. Sorry, I'm looking at questions. I'll talk about I'll address the questions at the end. So I'll just go on with this. So yeah. So when we are developing, the main the additional thing that we are doing apart from what the UX has given us and front end has given us is to try and make the life of our content authors as easy as possible, because end of the day, CMS authoring is something that we are providing, and this is the primary thing that we are providing, and you want to make that experience as good as possible. Now, most of the time, the content authors are Sitecore aware, obviously, but all of these things that we are adding, things like, if you're adding edit frame somewhere, experience editor, buttons somewhere, all of these take the time to document and demo that effectively. A lot of the times I have seen that content authors are not even aware of all the things that we have done to kind of expose all this functionality to them. So whatever you have done and what are the best ways of making something editable and stuff like that, I would say take the time to um, show all of that to your content author. Even if you're not directly exposed to them, then show it to whoever, if your QA is the one who's doing it. So take the time to make sure that that information has been sent across. Placeholder settings in experience editor mode is extremely critical, obviously, because when you're trying to add a component to a placeholder, you will see the list of renderings that are available to be added, and that is something that you will need to configure and make sure that in certain the components that are available in a certain location on the page, only those are configured and are allowed in a given placeholder. So make sure that you set that effectively. On your renderings which use data sources, make sure that you set your data source location, data source template, so that only valid data sources can be selected, and the content author is not scrolling up and down the entire tree trying to find the data source and trying to figure out where to create it. So this helps in organizing things. And the checkbox, and I think it's a drop down that we have for open data source dialog by default. So this is something that is so underused, and it is so easy, this is such a easy thing to add. just to make sure that it's a hint for the content author to tell that there's something additional you need to do. You just can't add the component and expect it to show up. So in case it does need a data source mandatorily, so it's a good thing to make sure that it opens up, the dialog box opens up, kind of nudging the client that they need to do it. So it reduces the clicks also. I know that once they add it and they go and see it's not rendering on the page, then next step would be to go and see what data source they need to add. But giving a nudge before is what is obviously makes the experience better. Fixed data sources. This is something that is sometimes applicable, but it's good to consider this while you're doing things. So stuff like maybe even a header, footer, or some sort of settings you're trying to output or something like that. So in that case, you might have a fixed data source item. So don't leave it up to the content author in that case. If it is not going to change anyhow, that is something that you can fix on the rendering. It might not be as applicable if you're using the rendering across multiple sites on your instance, but I guess it's just something to consider. So when you're using when you're setting components to allow controls in the placeholder settings, they kind of show up with thumbnails. So we have the ability to set rendering thumbnails on renderings. I think this is also extremely underused, but it improves the experience of the content editor immensely because they see sort of a preview of the component when they're trying to add it. So that is also something that I think it should be followed as a best practice. Compatible renderings. Now, this has been around since forever, even way before SXA came into the picture, but again, very rarely used. So setting compatible renderings on a rendering item, it kind of gives the experience, gives the content author additional options to swap out renderings which work in the same place on the page, same placeholder, and also possibly use the same kind of source content. So it could be as simple as different designs of, um, trying to render some common kind of data source. You might have just a headline, a title, a title, subtitle, and an image, but you might have different designs, different ways of rendering it on the page, and you can use that um, to configure the compatible renderings, and it gives a better experience to a content author to see that, okay, fine, this particular content, I can render it in these multiple ways. I can choose what I like in that way. Then for rendering parameters, you want to set rendering templates instead of relying on the text parameters, just because so in the backend, when we use rendering parameters or rendering templates, actually the value comes to us in a pretty similar manner. It comes as a string to us, as a list of parameters. But how the content author gets to set it, that is what I guess changes between these. In case of relying on text parameters, you're typing the parameter name, which is open to manual errors as such. So you will want to rely on using templates instead. Now, some general tips here, I guess, just to reiterate what things that would be best practices in this case. So the first thing and the most important thing to make sure is to test. A lot of these, you will want to make a pass when you're doing development. Maybe at the end of your development, just make a pass and make sure that these are the list of fields that I have on the page, and these are the fields that my content is being sourced from. Make a pass to kind of go over those fields and make sure that everything is editable in experience editor mode. So that is something that you need to stress on right from the beginning. Do it in the end, it's just not going to work, just because there's so much happening. So it's something that needs to be done in a continuous way. Now the renderings themselves, they have so many options on them. A lot of them I have gone over, but it's a good idea to go over the rendering item fields themselves, and sometimes they add new stuff even in the new versions of Sitecore, or when you install things like SXA, you get more options. So take the time to go over the fields in the renderings, and see why they are there and what each of them do. I think that is something that is a good exercise for all developers. Dynamic placeholders. So this is something that has come as a part of, I think, Sitecore 9 it came. Previously, we were just using custom implementations of this. So using dynamic placeholders, it is I think more specific to Experience Editor, because this is pretty hard to use in Content Editor mode, because you don't know the dynamic key and all of that. You can get that from the Experience Editor mode, but then it's not as straightforward as using the static placeholders. So it's primarily used in Experience Editor mode. So whenever you're using the dynamic placeholders, make sure that they're configured correctly and they're um, you know uh, well used in the particular scenario that you have. Um, in I want to give an example here. In one of our projects that we had worked, we favored using dynamic placeholder a lot over perhaps using um, uh, the say I think as an example, we had like a card list component which had like 4 cards in a particular row on the page, and what we had done was we were using dynamic placeholder for each of these cards as well, even though the card list was a single component. So we preferred, in that case, we had preferred creating dynamic placeholders for each card instead of using a data source and selecting the card sources on that data source item. So this has its own pros and cons. I believe it depends also on what your content authors might prefer or be used to. So that is something that you might want to consider, using placeholders for every single thing versus creating complex data structures, things like using reference fields on your data sources, and for your child items and things like that. So that's a consideration, I guess, that you need to have of how I guess what your content authors are more comfortable with. End of the day, you can configure either of these to return the same website to you. So that is not the consideration. It's more about your editability. Dictionary is a great tool, but out of the box, it's not editable. So you might want to review the usage of your dictionary items. I know that a lot of people have tried, there have been a lot of instances where we have tried to make the dictionary editable as well, a lot of custom code and things like that. But I don't think it's available out of the box yet. It's not in the latest version either. So that is something that you might want to consider, in case it belongs to a different um, a source item of some sort. You might want to configure things there, have a section for labels in your context item or your data source instead of using dictionary. So that's, I guess, a consideration. When I was talking about the card list, that's when I kind of referred to this. So say you had the card list, so you can just set the data source as the parent item, and in the code you can access the child items. But that makes it hard to add and remove um, what is what is showing on the screen, as opposed to having like a multi-list field or something where you're selecting the child items. So that is something that you can make editable. So when you have these kind of components which are using a data source and its child items, it's I believe it's a good practice to have a reference field where you're on the data source, where you're selecting the child items and reordering them and everything to see what is being displayed. So from an experience editor perspective, at least. Um, so that, and like I mentioned, the preview mode, extremely underused, but try to rely on that and not fall back on the experience editor mode as a preview mode. So that is something I would want to stress on. And oh yeah, in a lot of projects, we have this when you open a page on Experience Editor, if for a particular component which expects a data source, there is no data source set. So you sometimes have this, styled alert kind of thing for the content author, where you're calling out that this this particular component, it needs a data source but doesn't have anything. So I think that is a nice practice to have, and you can do it in an automated way as well. You can add it. So that is something you might want to look into, where you have a global rendering for showing that alert to the content author, and it only shows up in Experience Editor mode, so that they know that they have a visual indicator of what components are still on the page but will not probably be rendered in the website. Um, yeah, this is one thing that I have seen in some projects. So what they've done is, I guess it's a good thing that they are trying to, in some projects that I've seen, that they are trying to not show the complete, stack trace, an exception stack trace for a given component in Experience Editor mode, because you possibly don't want the content author to see it. But the I think one of the big selling points for Experience Editor mode to developers, for me, is that you might have an entire website page bombing in Sitecore, but when you come to Experience Editor, it is kind of contained, and you can see which component exactly is bombing and what is the error. So I think that is a big selling point for me as a developer. But I might not want to show that to the content author. So sometimes we have these custom error messages for components which are bombing in Experience Editor mode. So I guess depending on the need, you're free to implement that. But I would say that have a sort of toggle so you can easily turn that on and off for when you're doing debugging. So that was, I think, the only tip in this case that I would give. Um, yeah, so that is pretty much it. I think that was the only thing. These are the only things that I had to share about Experience Editor. And like I mentioned, none of these are novel concepts. They've been around in Sitecore for forever. But I did think that it was, worth bringing up, just to make sure, just because I see that, it's not always apparent to all developers. So that's all I had. Let me take a look at the questions that were posted and go over those. So best practices for designing and implementing edit frames effectively. I think in with regard to edit frames, it's uh, the most important thing would be, when you're talking about best practices, would be the way you're organizing them in your content tree. So you would want to keep a handle on that, because it's quite easy to lose sight of the way that you have these buttons created and organized. So sometimes you have the same set of fields being uh, mentioned in multiple sets of Experience Editor buttons. So you will want to keep it organized in that way. I think that is the main thing. From a code perspective, it's quite hard to get it wrong. But how you are organizing it in the content tree in the core database, I think this is the main um, thing to call out in this case. The next question I see is, um, are there any limitations on the field types that can be utilized with these two? No, I think any field type can be used. There's no limitation here, because once you've added the field names and it has been able to resolve the field names to the item that you're sending, it pretty much opens up the same content editor UI with these fields available on them. So anything that you can edit in a content editor, you should be able to add it and make it editable in both of these methods. How do we organize our renderings, such as containers and splitters on the page? Hmm. So so containers and splitters, etc., usually we don't have any fields on them that need to be edited on Experience Editor mode. So I'm not sure if that is something that will apply for making fields editable. So you might not really have to do anything in this in regard of these kind of renderings with regard to making fields editable. All right, so yeah, I think those were the questions that I have addressed. Now, if anyone has any other questions or anything you'd like to hit me up about, I've mentioned my contact info here. So, yep, that's all I had, unless there are more questions. I'm sorry, I said I'll finish in half an hour, but looks like I took almost a hour.
Yeah, that's a great session. Thanks
That's
for the
amazing.
good session. And in case of
Alright.
any, yeah, in case of any other questions still anyone has, please reach out to Aninditra through the contact information or reach us. We'll try to contact her and get it answered.
Sure, I'm pretty active on all these channels, and we have our, um, SUJ India WhatsApp group as well. I know everyone is aware of the Sitecore Telegram group, which is like more global, but we do have a nice, SUJ WhatsApp group for India, and it's quite active. I see a lot of people interacting, a lot of people just hitting up, whatever question you have, you instantly get like 350 eyes on it, because that's that's approximately how many members we have. So it's a very good place to get any information that you might need. There are a lot of channels, I guess, on Sitecore. Apart from this, you have your Slack channel as well. But if there's anything you'd like to um, ask specifically, I think the WhatsApp group is a great place. And apart from that, you can reach me on any of these channels as well.
Yep.
Thank you, Anindita. So it was a very wonderful session and very informative.
Right.
Thanks
Thank
for
you so much.
joining.
So I think we have 8 more minutes, and we are giving back all your times. And thank you everyone who's joining this session.
All right. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah, thank you all. Happy
Bye-bye.
Puja holidays. Bye-bye.
Oh, yeah. Have a nice celebration, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.